more than 3 millennia, a mysterious people inhabited the scorching earth of the Sinai Desert and southern Canaan. But these people did not form a tribe noma of any. In fact, these people had a very unusual ability at that time in the handling of metals that made them known in ancient history. However, this incredible ability for metallurgy, even in such a remote time, is not the only intriguing thing about these people. There is a hypothesis followed by some scholars that these nomadic and unknown people of most people were the first worshippers of Yahweh, that is, the covenant God with Israel, and that the Hebrews later would only have copied and adapted to the primitive belief of these people. So that, according to these scholars, the oldest document of the Pentateuch, which is the set of the first 5 books of the Bible, would be originally from this tribal people. And if all that were not enough, some people still think these people were from the lineage from one of Cain's descendants, which makes the story even stranger, as it would result in the idea that the Israelites would have adopted the religion of the descendants of the wicked son of Adam and Eve, who ended his own brother. But does this really make any sense? Who were these desert artisans who managed to master metallurgy, shaping metals before this practice becomes common? Even living as nomads, standing out from other peoples of their time. What is the real influence of this people on Israelite history? Were they the original worshippers of the God of Israel? Have they really been involved in the emergence of the first books of the Bible? What really happened to this people? If you have never heard of any of this, you need to know the story of the Kenites. The Kenites were a nomad or semi-nom tribe that inhabited the Sinai and southern Canaan region. The etymology of the name Kenites dates back to the Aramaic and Arab's roots of a word that is associated with metal and metallurgical work. Therefore, the Kenites are usually identified in ancient history as blacksmiths or as those who worked with metals. This meaning of the term Kenites finds parallels in the Old Testament, specifically in the figure of Tubal-Cain, son of Lamech of Cain's lineage, described as the master of all the work of copper and iron in Genesis chapter 4 and verse 22. It does not mean that the Kenites were descendants of Cain, but that they became known to have skills and a lifestyle that were developed by some representatives of Cain's family. Here then, we can already correct one of the mistakes about these people. There is no direct connection between Cain's family through Tubal-Cain and the Kenites, because they lived in completely different times, even separated by the Great Flood. But how did the Kenites live? The metallurgy exerted by Kenites was very appreciated in antiquity. However, in addition to the metallurgy, the Kenites also dedicated themselves to grazing and lived in tents, showing a nomad lifestyle adapted to the conditions of the desert. Even the skills of the Kenites as blacksmiths are aligned with the presence of rich, high-quality copper ore deposits found in the region where these people live, such as Sinai and Vadi Araba. But it seems that the Kenites did not organize themselves in a uniform group. Instead, some scholars believe that the Kenites probably formed different clans, who had a common ancestral root and inhabited the same region. In addition, archaeological evidence as a mural found in Egypt, dating from the 19th century BC, illustrate the nomadic life of the Kenites, highlighting their skills in various areas, from metallurgy to music and livestock. This mural presents men, Semitic, accompanied by their families, carrying various items, including bellows, which indicates the practice of metallurgy during its migrations. Old Testament narratives offer additional details about the Kenites. The biblical text mentions the connection between Kenites and other peoples of Sinai, such as the Midianites, and reinforces the record that they were present in areas rich in minerals, such as Negebi and the Araba region. In addition to geographically locating the Kenites, these biblical passages also point to the likely diversity within this group. Moses' father-in-law, for example, is identified as Quenu and Midianite, highlighting the tribal integrations of nomadic peoples at that time. They signed alliances with each other and lived in various communities. However, some scholars argue that the connection between Kenites and Midianites was restricted to location only, not exactly to tribal identity. In the first biblical reference to this people, the land of the Kenites was promised by God to the descendants of Abraham in Genesis chapter 15, verse 19. But did this mean that Israelites and Kenites be completely enemies? Well, on this, we can say that the distinction between Kenites and Midianites is quite complex, and in fact, the Midianites became great opponents of the Israelites. However, following biblical history, there were several moments of cooperation between representatives of the Kenites and the children of Israel, as during the Exodus, Moses' own marriage to Zipporah, the daughter of Jethro, who was a Kenite man, and the subsequent offer of Obebe, possibly brother-in-law of Moses, to guide the Israelites through the desert, indicate the integration and significant impact of the Kenites in the trajectory of the Israelites in that period. The father-in-law de Moses, this means that yes, a man new influenced the initial model of organization and leadership of the people of Israel after exit of the Egyptian lands. Then during the periods of the judges and the monarchy in Israel, the Kenites continued to maintain a significant presence in the region, especially with the descendants of Moses' relatives integrating with Israelite communities. The presence of the Kenites among the men of Judah and their mention in biblical genealogies attest their lasting influence and their place in the history of Israel. Still in this context, the Bible speaks of some Kenites who descended from the founder of the group of Rechabites and who constituted groups of scribes in Jabes. For those who do not know, the Rechabites formed a clan among the Kenites, known for their unique lifestyle and their abstinence votes, and were highly praised in the Bible as examples of obedience and faithfulness. So, through the prophet Jeremiah, the Lord promised to bless the Rechabites, causing them to always have descendants to serve him as a reward for their loyalty and obedience. When Saul made war against the Amalekites, the Kenites were spared. King Israel warned him so that the Kenites would leave the midst of the Amalekites so as not to be destroyed with them. Later, David used his spoils to give the cities of the Kenites who were in the territory of Judah. And now we come to the most controversial question involving this people. Was the Kenites really the first worshippers of Jehovah? Over time, many scholars have already debated the influence of the Kenites in their conviviality with the Israelites. In this sense, what became known as the Kenite hypothesis, which addresses Moses' knowledge of God and the practice of specific handicraft skills. Basically, the Kenite hypothesis is based on the premise that the ability of Moses and Aaron in the merger and foundation of metals, as shown in the creation of the golden calf and the bronze serpent during the Israeli pilgrimage by Sinai, may have been acquired through Thamas's association with the Kenites, since this essential metallurgical ability to make these objects was a characteristic feature of this people. And to this point, we have to admit that this argument can make sense, because it is not implausible that Moses, having lived among the Kenites, has learned and absorbed their skills and techniques, including the art of metallurgy. Therefore, there is no problem supposing something like that. But the Kenite hypothesis is failed when it proposes that Moses learned the name of God, Yahweh, through his father-in-law, Kenite. Even this theory suggests that the oldest Pentateuch document would be Source K or Kenite. And in this way, the hypothesis argues that Jehovah was originally the tribal deity of the Kenites, and that Jethro, the father-in-law of Moses, was the main priest of this cult. Then, supposedly, Moses would have seized this religion in his father-in-law's clan, who was even a priest in Midian, and used to shape a new belief among the Israelites. In other words, this hypothesis basically suggests that when Moses fled from Egypt and housed himself in the house of a Kenite Midian priest, he was indoctrinated in the belief of that people. He learned about a deity called Yahweh, and later he used the whole system of belief adapted to form a new religion among the Hebrews. However, obviously, this is very problematic. There is no biblical or historical evidence that serves to substantiate the allegations of this theory that the Kenites was the original Yahweh worshippers. On the contrary, the biblical text clearly indicates that Yahweh was already known by the patriarchs long before the meeting of Moses with the Kenites. Moreover, the text of the book of Exodus, chapter 18, leaves no doubt that Kenite Jethro was brought to faith in the God of Israel through the testimony of Moses, not the other way around. The text records that Moses told his father-in-law all that God had done to Pharaoh and the Egyptians for love of Israel. And Jethro was amazed at the great deliverance of the Israelites in Egypt. Then Moses' father, in law of Moses glorified God for the powerful manifestation of his redeeming acts for the children of Israel, and offered sacrifices to the Lord, so that Aaron and all the elders of Israel ate with him before God. In this context, Moses' father-in-law made a very interesting statement. He said, "Now I know that the Lord is greater than all the gods, because he freed this people from the hands of the Egyptians when they acted arrogantly against the people." This suggests very clearly that he managed, as a representative of the Kenites, was learning about Yahweh, the God of Israel, through Moses, and not teaching Moses on him. For all this, the Keen hypothesis has been widely rejected by the Old Testament scholars. What is indeed reliable about the Kenites boils down to the fact that they were nomadic tribes that dominated metallurgy skills, and that they interacted significantly with the Israelites in the context of the Old Testament. And that through this contact, some of these people, especially those in the family lineage of Moses, received knowledge about the only true God, and were brought to genuine faith and integration into the covenant community. Now write in the comments if you already knew the story of Kenites in the Bible and what you think about this Keen hypothesis. And if you want to study God's Word more deeply and detailed, I invite you to study theology with us from anywhere, at any time, totally online, with video lessons, handouts, and certificate of completion. The information is in the video description and the first comment fixed.
What you just watched wasn't just a video, it was a presence exercise. If you stayed until now, it shows something in you is more awake. Comment on what stayed with you, what message hit you hardest, and share this with someone who also values this kind of conversation. Thanks, a big hug, and see you in the next video.